And then my dad called and said, I'd love for you to come back to Baton Rouge and help us run this insurance company, Starmount Insurance Company. And I said, there's 3 things that just popped to mind that make this seem like not such a great idea. 1, it's in Baton Rouge and I'm living in New York City, the best city in the world. I don't know, it rivals DC. And yet it's Baton Rouge. 2nd, it's insurance, and nothing sounds more boring to me than running an insurance company. And 3rd, it's, working with family. So how about I fly down and I'll interview you. Remember, I've interviewed people for my entire career at this point. So I'll interview you and I'll see if I want to work with you. And he's like, you're going to do what?
We would like to thank our title sponsor, B1 Bank. B1 Bank knows that entrepreneurs like you are always thinking one step ahead. So you need banking solutions that can keep up. It begins with lending. Does your business need working capital or financing for new equipment? How about a real estate or a construction loan? Good news, the B1 lending team is ready to learn your goals and help you find the best lending option available. Now let's talk about uncomplicating your daily cash flow. B1 offers a full array of treasury management services that let you collect funds faster, pay funds more efficiently, and access your information with powerful online tools. Most importantly, B1 understands the value of working with local nonprofits to build a stronger community. They believe in giving back through hands-on involvement with their B1 Community Outreach Program because it's simply the right thing to do. B1 Bank. Be uncomplicated. To learn more, visit b1bank.com. Equal housing lender, member FDIC. Hello, I'm Andrew McClendon, your host of the Next Entrepreneur Podcast. We're back in the Propel Production Podcast Studio in Baton Rouge. We're in Los Angeles last week. Had 2 great episodes, one with Hollywood actor Jay Hughley, and the second with business growth consultant Bill Atchison. Just great conversations, and I hope you guys can catch those. Today, we welcome into the studio Deborah Sternberg. Deborah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
You're founder and chair of Young Entrepreneurs Academy of Baton Rouge. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Sure. So the Young Entrepreneurs Academy of Baton Rouge is an academy that focuses on 8th through 12th grade students. So students in high school who have an aptitude and interest in launching their own business. And over the course of the academic year, they go from business ideation to writing a business plan to filing that company with the Secretary of State's office to actually competing for seed funding and graduating and receiving 3 credits or being eligible for 3 credits from the College of Business at LSU.
Oh, that's fantastic. Now, is that happening after hours?
It does. So the students meet every Wednesday at LSU's College of Business from 5 to 8 p.m. So this is about 100 hours of education and work in addition on top of high school. Yes.
Yeah. So are each of the students coming in with their own idea?
Actually, you don't have to have a business idea when you apply. The students are applying right now for the fall cohort, and you don't have to have an idea for a business. It's just an interest and eagerness to learn.
That is fascinating. We will dig into that, but I wanted to start with your family history, and it is rich. And your father wrote a book called We Were Merchants. You come from generations of merchants dating back to the mid-1700s, where your ancestors were shopkeepers in a small town in Germany, which is fascinating. And your father's very proud of that merchant status and the longevity of the legacy of your family in that industry, and I suspect you are as well.
Very, very proud.
So maybe we start with your grandfather, Eric.
Sure.
Tell us how the story starts from that point.
Yeah, and I'll tell you that it starts even clearer for me because a few years ago, my dad had never been back to Germany, and I said, we really need to go just so my kids can see it and you can be back. And after 79 years, he finally went back. So
oh, my goodness.
The story starts with my grandfather and grandmother both in Aurich, Germany, which is a northern town about a couple of hours outside of Amsterdam. And it's on the northern border of Germany, and they both grew up with separate stores, so they almost competed. So the
Really?
Knorr family, which is my grandmother's family, had a store, and my grandfather's family, the Sternberg family, had a store. And they met in Aurich and got married, had 3 kids, and this was all happening right before World War II. Right. And at a time when the German government decided that Jewish kids could no longer attend public schools, and there were signs outside the department stores, don't shop here. My grandfather and grandmother decided that it was time to leave. And so my grandfather left first and came to the United States. And
how did he make his way to Baton Rouge?
Family. So took a boat over, knew no English at the time, and took a boat over and ultimately made it from the Northeast down to New Orleans, where he had family. There's some funny stories. Again, he couldn't speak English at the time, and so the family took him out to a steak dinner, trying to show him, the hospitality, and went to this great steak restaurant and asked my grandfather, "What do you think of the steak and of the food, of the steak specifically?" And he said, "It's tough." And they were so mortified because in English, that's not a good thing to have tough steak. But what he was saying was, "It's good. It's very good" in German. And so they knew that my grandfather was a merchant, and that's what he knew, and decided, based on the funds, the money that he was able to get out of Germany, that his money would go further in Baton Rouge than New Orleans. And so they took him to come see this place, this store, which was only a men's clothing store at the time, that was, between a cemetery and a railroad. So location didn't really play in his mind, but he could work there, and he could ultimately buy that men's clothing store. And so then the story continues that, when it was time that he felt settled enough in Baton Rouge, he sent for my grandmother with 3 kids, my dad being the youngest of those 3. He was 18 months old. And he was cryptically telling my grandmother, "I got my first customer." And so she knew by the code words that he would send that it was time for her to come over. Oh, wow. And so she took a boat, but there are funny stories about her taking that boat also.
I've read that your grandmother was your hero.
Yeah, she is.
Yeah.
Absolutely. She is a woman who I grew up across the street from her, so I know Leah pretty well, and she a tough dynamite of a person, very determined, and you never doubted where she stood on things, and I think that's a great quality. And when she was escaping and leaving Germany, the Nazis stopped her before she got on the boat, and they were going through all of her luggage and all of her clothes and taking things apart. She had baked cookies and crumbling them up to see what she was, smuggling out of Germany, and it was a disaster. Right, the ship's here, Leia's here with these 3 kids, and the Nazis had just taken all of her stuff out and left it. And my grandmother, who was about my stature, so 5'1", 5'2", looked at them and said, "You took it out, you put it back in." And for a small-statured, very determined Jewish woman to look at Nazis and say it at that time was relatively unheard of, and yet they put it all back in her. So, and they got on the ship.
Oh, that's breathtaking.
Yeah.
Love
Yeah.
that. So they bought the men's clothing store.
So they ultimately did. They bought the men's clothing store, and they had an apartment right by the store. And a funny story, they came over with not much, and they invested it all into that men's clothing store. And my grandmother, upon arrival, said, "I need a mop and a broom to keep the house, the apartment, clean." And my grandfather said, "You can have a mop or a broom, not both." And so they did buy the men's clothing store and expanded it from there.
So it's really interesting when I read about how it was a pretty nondescript little men's clothing store, but did your grandmother work with your grandfather?
Yes.
At the store?
At the store.
And so they were determined to build it into a department store.
Yes, they were first determined to make sure that anyone who wanted to get out of Germany could. So my grandfather would sign on the back, on the back of people's, documents on the back of people's back. They would bring them to Eric Sternberg, my grandfather, and say, work permits. As long as people had work permits, they could get out. He signed hundreds of them. Oh, wow. It's a really good thing that they didn't all show up in Baton Rouge because there was no place for them to work. But he was adamant about giving them the opportunity to at least get out.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I was intrigued to learn about how he went about growing the business and improving the business, and going to New York and buying the latest fashions and furs, and his passion for customer service, impeccable service, and then creative promotions, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So which made me think of at a little later time, Sam Walton, kind of inventing discounting or bringing that to fashion, and those are the difference makers, like someone who's taking something that's been done a certain way in retailing and then making that change. And so Eric was building the brand, your grandfather was building the brand of Godshalls at the time, and he started to grow the business and at that location.
Yes.
Yeah.
So 1500 Main Street in downtown Baton Rouge. That was the location of the men's clothing store. That became the ultimately the Ripley's, believe it or not, largest department store built, family-owned department store. Yeah. And so that was the beginning of it. And, customer service was everything, and the promotions, how, a $1 umbrella just come in and there would be, stacks and stacks of these umbrellas. People would come in for a $1 umbrella and then obviously, wander around and shop. But I think there are a couple of really, having interest-free credit cards. If you didn't have to pay interest, then everyone got a credit card. So you ended up ultimately with hundreds of thousands of families people who had credit cards because there was no paying of interest and there was great customer service, and you could really go one stop and find most of what you were looking for. And so with offering interest-free credit cards, that was a game changer, I believe. A funny story, the store started with a gold card, and American Express has a gold card. But before they had the gold card, Godshalls had the gold card. And so American Express actually came to my father and Uncle Joe and asked if they could have the gold card. Now to my family, it was just a gold card. It could be any color card. But to American Express, they really needed that gold card. So they ultimately bought the gold card from my family, and we just changed the color of the card.
Oh, that is amazing.
But that's the card that had the free alterations and the free this and the free that, and
Fantastic story. So your father and Uncle Joe then grew up and started working in the store under your grandfather.
Yes, they both went off to college and the Navy and service, but ultimately came back Actually, the rule was my dad worked at a competitor to understand and learn more, and then came back and then helped run the stores.
Now, how long had they been working when your grandfather passed, which was around 1965, if I remember?
Yeah, so I'm not quite sure that year, but I know they worked together, and then ultimately my dad and grandfather ran it.
Right.
With Leah, of course.
Right. And so, and then they really started
Growing.
They really started to grow there.
That's right.
And so it looked like they stuck to the principles, right, of quality merchandise, employee loyalty, and superior customer service, right? And
that's what it's all about.
And but then they started to grow into the suburban malls, including Cortana Mall here, not far from us, which is all now
ironically
gone. Yeah.
Ironically, going to become Amazon.
Yeah. So, and then, so there, a couple of decades pass as they're growing this business, but then a hugely bold move in the late '80s with the merger acquisition of Maison Blanche out of New Orleans, and I can remember the news of that. That was big doings, right?
It was fantastic. It was great for just the store. We were ready, and the broadening into that market was tremendous. We ultimately had 24 stores, and Leah was adamant, I'll never forget, that the store will be called Gotcha's. So we had to keep Gotcha's, even when we added Maison Blanche. But there were many cups of tea at Leah's house to discuss the name of the store.
Yeah, because I can remember the thought of that change was just unfathomable.
Yes. So it was Gotcha's Maison Blanche for many.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember you had like 8,000 employees.
That's right.
I mean, it was did you say it's the largest family-owned department store chain in the United States?
That's right.
Just massive.
Yeah.
And
that was the building downtown. Now, we had 8,000 employees between Louisiana and Florida.
Right. Once you had done the Maison Blanche and continued to expand.
Exactly.
You ended up with that number of employees. So towards the late 80s and then the early 90s, you lost your Uncle Joe.
That's right, early 90s. Yeah. Uncle Joe passed, and the banking system was not what it is or had been, and it was time to sell the stores. So we sold the stores in 92.
So how was that for your family? And I'm thinking of your father in particular. I'm a big fan of your father.
Yeah. So that was, I bet if you asked. I mean, he misses his brother tremendously. Yeah. They were tied at the hip. Yeah. The pictures of the two of them, I saw one yesterday just walking down the aisle together with their arms around each other. That is quintessential, Hans and Joseph. They walked the aisles all the time. You always knew one of them was around to help and answer a question.
I saw them over the years countless times in the stores. Yeah. I remember more so here at Cortana, and it was just fascinated that they would be so accessible, and I was intrigued with how much of an investment they made in updating the stores. Massive renovations, and
There are funny stories about that. So we would go on vacation. I put that in air quotes because my dad and I would literally walk the floors of competition. Wherever we went, we would go to a store, and my dad still to this day carries a dictaphone, and so he would be, in the aisles at another department store making notes, of what they did so that we could enhance what we did. I'm like, that is fascinating.
Oh, my
but
goodness.
It's you learn by being in the place.
But I mean, you grew up learning from the master.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't think of anyone more profound in the realm of business than your father.
Yeah, people are like, so tell me about your kitchen table. I'm like, well, if you weren't interested in business, it was probably pretty boring. But if you were open to learning about business, it was fascinating. I always thought I would be working in the stores, and then we sold them while I was at university, and so that my plans pivoted, and that was just a logical place for me to go. I love to sell and would walk the floors with Leia a lot. Of course, people were like, "Oh, Miss Leia's coming. Straighten, just straighten."
Be busy.
Keep busy, but she was a master as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine. I read that your father wasn't really into idle chat. He wanted to be accomplishing something. Like if you're on a
all
job,
the time.
If you're on a job with him, he's grilling you about
mental math.
Mental math.
Yes, there's always something on my dad's mind. So, we would go on runs, exactly, he and I, and it would just be quizzing me on mental math just to keep, whereas most people would talk about the weather, my dad would want to make sure that we could all do mental math.
I love that. So, the sale of Godshaw's and Maison Blanche went through, but your dad didn't let much grass grow under his feet there. I mean, he held on to the insurance company.
So when we were selling the stores, there was an insurance agency inside the department store. So we would sell term life insurance to all of those credit card holders. Remember, interest-free. So there were hundreds of thousands of them, and there would be statement stuffers offering them life insurance. And so when the purchaser bought the department store, they wanted nothing to do with insurance. It's highly regulated, as you know, and it's not retail. So they asked my father if he wanted to keep the insurance company, to which he, of course, said sure, and spun the insurance company out, renamed it from Gottschall's Life Insurance to Starmount Life Insurance, which is the literal translation of my last name, Sternberg. Starmount is German transliteration from Sternberg, Starmount. So my family came up with that as the name Starmount, and that's how that name came about.
Now, did he write his book in between, or was that going on simultaneously?
So the We Were Merchants book came after Starmount was launched.
That's right. That makes sense. I had a quick story about your father. We built a building for him, for Starmount.
Yes.
Off of Jefferson in an office part, expanding where you were. Of course, y'all were growing. Yeah. And I went in his office one day, and maybe he was reviewing our application for payment. I can't remember exactly. And the name of my business was MBD Construction. And he looked at that, and he kind of shook his head, and he paused for a moment. He said, "That's not a good name."
Again, you always know what my family is thinking.
But I knew that he was 100% correct. But I'd had the name for 10 years. I started when I had two partners. That was our initials. But I felt like I was too far in to change. And, and I kept it for another 20 years. And I just changed it like 2 years ago.
He will be so proud of you.
I know. And you'll tell him that I finally took his advice.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's take a quick break, get in a word from our sponsor, and we'll be right back. We would like to thank MBD Automation for their support of the Next Entrepreneur podcast. MBD Automation is a mechanical install contractor with a program-centric focus. So what do these guys do? They install conveyor systems, VRCs, platforms, singulators, sorters, and all sorts of other types of automated equipment. Who do they work for? They work for systems integrators, manufacturers, and end users in fulfillment centers, airports, mail processing facilities, and projects in the defense industry. MBD Automation works for numerous Fortune 500 companies across the United States and has a list of international clients that they perform work for in the U.S. as well. If MBD Automation can help you on your next project, you can find them online at mbdautomation.com. And we are back with Deborah Sternberg. So, Deborah, you grew up in Baton Rouge,
yes,
right? And you went to college out of state. How did you select?
So I ended up going to Barnard College at Columbia University in New York City. I spent time in New York City buying trips with my parents for the stores. And one funny story is I was with my mom, who was the fur buyer. And I'm not sure if you've ever been into a fur buying studio.
I can tell you for sure that I have not.
And of course, we wouldn't be buying furs today, but this was when I was a kid. And so we got off the elevator, and it was this dark hallway with this dark studio. And I just turned to my mom like, they really need a decorator. So it was many years going up to the market with my parents. Love the energy in New York City. I'd gone to high school with all of my cousins and siblings in Baton Rouge. My siblings were all going to university together, and I was like, there are thousands of universities, so we're just not going to do that. I'm going to go on my own. So applied and got in and loved my time in New York, loved the energy, studied political science and communications. And while I was there, I had the opportunity to volunteer and cover one of the elections at CBS News. And
just as an intern?
Just as an intern, just for the election night coverage. It was actually just that evening, and
it'd be interesting to see how that changes from how that was back then versus how they do it now with all their interactive maps and stuff.
Yeah. Yes. And so I was just studying the data and just helping that evening in the studio, and knew that it was something that I wanted to pursue if possible at some point. And having said that, I was, spending my summers working with Mary Landrieu. She was the treasurer at the time of Louisiana, running for governor. So I was her driver. When she hired me, she's like, "You're a fantastic aide, not such a great driver." And I'm like, "You hired me. I spend all year in New York City. I don't drive a car in New York City. So frankly, I'm not sure it's my fault." And she and I are still close and friends, and of course, talk, whenever she's in Baton Rouge, and whenever one of us needs anything, we're always in touch. But I'll never forget that conversation. I'm like, seriously? But I spent several summers with her driving around the state. One time we had an event. I would say it was somewhat in the swamplands of Louisiana. We got there, and, it was this aluminum-like building. And we walked in, and the first thing the gentleman asked was, "Where's your bodyguard?" And I just looked at Mary, and she said, "Well, Deborah's here." And I'm like, "Oh boy, if you're banking on me to be a bodyguard, we have, a lot to talk about." And it was a fantastic experience being her aide and driver. And when she lost that race, then CBS hired me to be on the national desk and cover national news in New York. So I went back to New York, and Mary.
And you're doing production, or?
So I was an associate producer at the time, and I was coming up with story ideas, pitching them to all the various broadcasts. I was tracking what's happening in national news to make sure that CBS knew all the stories. I was coming up with not only story ideas, but helping them if they needed characters, as we call it in network production, sources, people to speak with. So whatever was coming across the desk, I would handle it on the national side. There was also an international desk.
You talked about your first assignment.
Oh, well, so that was on the national desk. So the story goes that after I worked at the national news desk, I was there, and actually Mary lost the gubernatorial race, but ran for U.S. Senate, right? And so I was not a part of that race, but when she won the U.S. Senate, she called and asked if I would move to D.C. and be her deputy chief of staff, to which I said, sure. And so left CBS, went to D.C., was her deputy chief of staff, loved it. I mean, remember, I studied politics and communication, so I was doing all of the things that I
that's
actually
a job
studied.
There, huh?
Loved it. It was so much fun. Was able to travel back to the state with the senator, and obviously help her on initiatives in D.C. And then I left the Senate to go back to CBS, and ultimately Dan Rather's office called and asked if I would be his associate producer, his producer for breaking news. which is by far the most fun, period. First of all, the stories are not always fun, but the energy and the adrenaline to get it right, and working with Dan Rather he's a fantastic mentor. I still read his work and listen to him all the time. He's just a fantastic mentor, and to cover stories with him was just one in a million. So that was so much fun. But so I was on my way from DC to New York, and CBS asked me to essentially turn around because the first story that I worked with Dan Rather on was Bill Clinton's impeachment hearing back in DC. So turned around and joined him to cover that.
Trial by fire, huh?
It was an interesting one to start.
Now, how long would you have stayed engaged with that one in DC?
So we were there for a few weeks, and then went back to New York, and there was so much news to cover that,
And then how long were you with CBS?
So all told, about 6 years, and we would cover the Hanging Chad election, John F. Kennedy Jr.'s plane crash, anything that rose to the level of breaking news when we would jump on air. And then when we weren't jumping on air, I was researching potential stories that we would need to cover.
And what is the producer actually doing? Define that job to me.
So
in the breaking news.
Right. So my role was to make sure that Mr. Rather had information on a continual basis and that it made sense. So for election I covered all of those elections in that period of time with him. So prior to election night, he and I would study, and I had researched every House, Senate, gubernatorial, presidential election and candidate for every House seat, every Senate seat. So creating a database of who's who, who's running, pros and cons, so that if we ended up in Indiana congressional seat 6, I could pull a card and hand it to him and say, here's the data on that. So,
and how much staff do you have at that point?
How many staff?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's just me. And so that's a staff of 1 on all of the research. And then to be able to, and if you've ever listened to Dan Rather, and I'm sure you have, it's all of the quirky quips that Mr. Rather would throw out. So I would have them all, and I still have all of these cards. I need to send them to him, but all of his quips and quotes. And so then I would just be continually handing him information so that as an anchor, he always had something accurate to say. And so that's my job. And so finding, I would work with the producer, make sure we had, other guests in the studio as well, and making sure that we had the right information about whatever was happening.
And so you also had a memorable last assignment.
So at this point in my career, I had shifted to 48 hours, still at CBS, and the last story that I helped produce, one of many pieces, was related to 9/11. So I was on my way actually that day downtown from the Upper West Side to meet some people, and noticed something was off. Got out of the subway and ran to CBS and grabbed a satellite phone. First thing I did, because all the phones were jammed, and just called my parents and said, "I'm fine. I gotta go, but I'm at the CBS studio." And then they disseminated all the teams to various locations. I was sent to a Navy ship, which was being transitioned into a hospital. Yeah.
Whew. That's heavy duty.
Yeah. That was tough times. Yeah, for sure.
Oh my goodness. And then was there a spell at the White House Office of Media Affairs?
Yeah, so I took a semester off of college, so and worked at the White House, and was working with a speechwriter for the president, and really loved it. I spent time in Office of Management and Budget for a while, but really spent a good considerable period of time in the speechwriter's office.
What a fascinating journey so far, right? I mean, that's just so
A
cool.
lot of fun.
But you ultimately made it back to Baton Rouge.
Yeah, so I'll never forget that phone call. So I was at this point, after I left CBS, I was vice president of a public relations firm in New York. I was loving it. I was just sort of taking what I knew about what media needed and flipping it on its head. So working with producers and pitching them people to talk with. So one of my clients is the Joe Torre Safe at Home Foundation. I'm now on the board of the Joe Torre Safe at Home Foundation, but I would work a lot with Joe Torre and his wife Allie and about their foundation. But because he was manager of the Yankees and then Dodgers, I was spending a lot of time with the Yankees as well, and trying to get the media to stop talking about baseball when you talk to Joe Torre, and also focus on the foundation. But great time, loved being in the PR world. And then my dad called and said, I'd love for you to come back to Baton Rouge and help us run this insurance company, Starmount Insurance Company. And I said, there's three things that just popped to mind that make this seem like not such a great idea. One, it's in Baton Rouge and I'm living in New York City, the best city in the world. I don't know, it rivals DC. And yet it's Baton Rouge. Second, it's insurance, and nothing sounds more boring to me than running an insurance company. And third, it's working with family. So how about I fly down and I'll interview you. Remember, I've interviewed people for my entire career at this point. So I'll interview you and I'll see if I want to work with you. And he's like, you're going to do what? So I did. I came down to Baton Rouge. I spent considerable time with my older brother and my parents. And ultimately, my husband and I decided it was the right move. So I came down.
Wow. What a journey. And so, what size was the insurance company at that point?
So it was relatively, it was medium sized, but we weren't in 49 states. We were, probably in 20 states or so at that point, and mostly focused. My brother, Eric, had really gotten the business off the ground on the group insurance side. So that was a lot of hard work on Eric's side, and I came in and helped on the marketing communications, and ultimately, after 10 years, got us into, as a unit, we all worked together we had, I guess, over 300 employees, and we were in 49 states, only New York, because of the regulatory issues that surround New York, was the only state that we weren't in.
And at what point were you into leadership?
So at first, because I needed to really learn the business, I focused on marketing and communications. And then a few years in, I became president of the company and helped run it side by side with my dad and brother once I had a better handle on all the aspects of individual and group.
Ultimately, Eric became the CEO. You were the president, is that right?
And my dad's chairman of the board.
And I was reading where you were, all the things that you were responsible for, in charge of, made sense based on your career,
background.
right?
That's right.
Corporate communications and marketing and digital transformation. So you guys ran that for a number of years, and then there came a time where you had to make a big decision about what was the next step. Walk us through what that looked like as your family now are making decisions, big, bold decisions.
That's right. So we had grown the business together. It was, and I think continues to be, a very healthy business. And the distribution market, how products were distributed at that time, changed. So the broker, the agent piece had really, and that's how we sold so much of our product, was through agents and brokerages. And that world had really changed and consolidated. And
now that had to do what was going on with what was going on in politics at the time, or regulation.
I think more regulation and financial And so a lot of people were consolidating just for pure financial reasons. It made sense to join a bigger firm at that time, but that made fewer larger firms, and we were still relatively small compared to insurance companies like MetLife and New York Life and Guardian and others, that are very well known. So it just became harder with fewer options through the distribution channel.
I had read that your brother had initially come up with this realization or this idea that a sale may be one of the best strategies moving forward for your family. But no one else was on his side at the time, and there was a period of, him, making his points, and your father still maybe.
I think my father to this day would say we should still have the insurance company, but he would also realize that just like with the department stores, times change, and you need to be able to look far enough ahead to make sure that you're doing right by the family, but also the business and the employees.
So ultimately, the four of y'all were able to
absolutely
come together.
Yeah, you can't really do it without everybody coming together.
Make a decision as a unit.
That's right.
That's pretty interesting dynamics going on there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just depends on who sees it, and Eric saw it and was able to articulate to the rest of us. It took time, for sure. And I think what helped, Unum ultimately bought Starmount, and when we met with the Unum team, there was a instant synergy with the leadership team and their appreciation for customer service. I mean, when you think about all the traits of the department stores, we carry those over as applicable as they were to the insurance company. And we talked about that all the time. I mean, we would meet as the staff every Friday morning. And so until we were so big that we couldn't fit into the room together, but then we just figure out a way to do it. And we would always talk about customer service. We would reward our employees, our associates, for customer service, for coming up with ideas to make our company more efficient. So always trying to think, as entrepreneurs do, of how to do things better and for our customers and for our associates. And so that's all translatable from the department stores into the insurance company. Yeah. And Unum really got it and understood sort of the fundamentals of our company.
Your father was quoted as saying, the more the company grows, the better the people who work in the company do, the more fun I'm going to have.
That's right.
That's what I do. That's my golf game.
Yep. That his sport is business, without question.
Look, I get it. I mean, I think a lot of people kind of, ask the question, when are you going to retire? Like retirement is the ultimate goal.
Yeah.
But for many entrepreneurs, or extreme entrepreneurs like your family, that's what they do.
That's right.
That's what we do. That's where they get enjoyment out of life. And why in the world would I ever step away from that?
That's right.
Voluntarily.
And Dad and I have talked about that, Are you sure you just don't want to go do whatever else? And he's like, I'm doing exactly what I want to be doing. Thank you. But no need to check in on that anymore.
Yeah, I love that. But and I totally get it.
Yeah.
And I understand how some people wouldn't.
Yeah.
Right? They're working for the day that they don't have to work anymore, right?
Well, and just like we spun out the insurance company from the department stores, we spun out a payroll company called High Flyer from the insurance company before it was sold. And so now Dad is CEO of High Flyer, which is the payroll company, and Craig Broom is the president, and they work fabulously together, and it's going great.
Of course he spun something off, right? So just an incredible story. The brand that was created and built in Starmount and that business, another incredible success story. And
thank you.
And right on to the next thing for your father. So let us take another quick break here, Deborah, pick up a word from our sponsor, and we would like to thank Modus for their support of the Next Entrepreneur podcast. Who is Modus? Modus is a facility services company that works in the e-commerce fulfillment industry across the United States. What do? They like to say they take it from the conveyor to the dock door. Well, what does that mean? It means that they're building the pick stations with the cable management. They're installing guardrails and bollards. They're putting down floor marking. They're putting up aerial signage. These guys build fencing systems, shelving systems, and racking systems. They also do rack recovery for when there's rack failures. They also install dock levelers and dock doors. Modus also installs ASRS systems, which is automated storage and retrieval systems, as well as other robotics projects. They've worked for the largest e-commerce retailers in the world, and they can work for you. If you need to find Modus, you can reach them online at modusmoves.com. And we are back with Deborah Sternberg. So you guys had arranged a sale to Unum, but you stayed there for a bit.
I did. And once I wrapped up the transition with Unum, I left on great terms and decided I wanted to do something totally different and pay it forward. Obviously, I've grown up in an entrepreneurial family and wanted to pay it forward to future entrepreneurs.
And so how did you make that
materialize? I had a cup of coffee with Charlie D'Agostino, who at the time was executive director of the Innovation Park at LSU, and explained what I was looking to do. And he introduced me to the Young Entrepreneurs Academy, which is a national organization that focuses on middle and high school students who are interested in business. So we contracted with them and brought that national curriculum to the greater Baton Rouge area and launched the Young Entrepreneurs Academy of Baton Rouge.
So you're paying a fee and you're able to, you get their curriculum.
Exactly. So we access their national curriculum and then have access to their national pitch competition for one of our student businesses.
And so are there like are there pitch competitions at different levels?
So what happens is once the students create their business plan and file their businesses with the Secretary of State, there's a big pitch competition for $25,000. All of the student businesses receive some level of funding at the community pitch, whether it's $500 or $5,000. And it's really meant to help them get their startup off the ground in the next 6 months to a year. And so the judges at that community pitch not only decide how much seed funding to give each business, but they also decide which business best represents our region and will attend the national competition.
So as they're coming to their class, doing their classwork, I mean, is that the right way to describe it? How does that work? Are they in a class with 20 or 30 other kids, or is there a mentor?
Both. So they start in September not knowing anyone else. This current cohort represents 15 schools, so we draw from public, private, charter, and homeschool students in the 9-parish greater Baton Rouge area. So the likelihood that they know each other is small. And so up to 30 students are in each cohort. They meet in a classroom at LSU's College of Business every Wednesday from 5 to 8 p.m. They are taught by College of Business instructors and entrepreneurs and guest speakers every week. So if you think about it, one of the goals of the academy, at least in my mind, is to bring a diverse set of students from all backgrounds representing our region together, working together, getting to know each other, building foundation of business together, and also bringing a network of people to them. So by the end, in April, we've leveled the playing field. So all of the students now know an accountant. They all know an insurance broker that can help with their business. They all know, an attorney. Whether it's the right attorney when they need that attorney or not, doesn't matter, because the attorney is going to now take their call because they've spoken to the Young Entrepreneurs Academy, and they, of course, have their network of attorneys. So so teaching the importance of a network is also part of it. Teaching public speaking is part of it.
That's fantastic. Now, how do you bring the awareness of the academy across all of those schools and platforms?
So our executive director, Claire Willis, spends a lot of time in the schools and trying to get schools to allow her to come in and talk to business classes, or sometimes there's an entrepreneurial class, or there's an after-school program, or there's just a teacher that sees the importance of financial literacy. And so Claire will then present in the class about the program. And so she has a number of them lined up for this spring as well. But it's just a continual, awareness and sort of recruitment drive until the end of August. I'll tell you, high school students don't apply early. I wish they all applied like now. Some have, which is exciting. But between August 1st and August 21st, which is the deadline for applications this year, we'll receive probably 70-80% of the applications, which, I think they just want me to go crazy over the summer. Like,
yeah. Are they going to show up? But that's for everything, right?
I guess so.
That is for everything. They wait to see what all their options are. I mean, and so, but look, that's a young age to be, starting on a journey. You could expect, I imagine, that a lot don't stick. They're not quite ready or mature, but I'm sure there's success stories as well.
Absolutely. So we've added a component of an interview because to try to get a sense of, is this the 8th through 12th grade students' idea, or is it their parent or guardian's idea to apply? It's really important that the student is excited and the student shows up every week. Otherwise, they're taking a spot from someone else. So we usually, last year, we received 70 applications for 30 spots. So the interest is certainly there. Once they apply and they write a couple of essays, then each applicant is interviewed, just over the phone, FaceTime, or Skype, or something. So we don't meet at LSU. We don't ask everybody to go to LSU for interviews. And we interview everyone and determine their interest and their enthusiasm for business. And, that process has really helped us glean who's going to be successful in the class. Yeah. So sure, you might have one or two that they're like, by December, this is a lot of work, because it is a lot of work. And as much as Claire and I say, this is a lot of work, and all of the instructors, this is a lot of work, until you're in it, you don't fully appreciate it's a lot of work.
I mean, I can imagine for someone that age pulling up to the E.J. Orso School of Business at LSU. It's a magnificent facility, and they must feel like they're really doing something.
They do. I'll tell you, orientation's also at the E.J. Orso College of Business, and I've had parents and guardians walk up to me and say, I've never had the opportunity to sit in a university classroom. I cannot believe that my son or daughter or grandchild has this opportunity. And my only response is, we open the door. They have got to do the work. Yeah. And yes, we want them at this university. It's amazing to me, and not anymore. The first year was somewhat telling, that so many people had never been on campus. And the fact that this academy can open the door and open people's eyes to what's possible. We've had students have no interest in going to university after high school, who've called us in April and said, because of the experience of YEA and being in the classroom, I really would like to attend LSU. Is there any way you could write a recommendation? I know it's April. So, of course, we write a recommendation. But the idea was to create, and is successfully creating, this pipeline of young builders, people who are creative and want to be in business or finance or can see a path. And we're just trying to start that pathway a little bit earlier and help them get into the pipeline.
Yeah, Deborah, that is so exciting. It must be incredibly rewarding.
It is the most rewarding work I've ever done.
That is fantastic. Yeah. And that's saying something.
It is very rewarding.
So what is your vision for the future of this program?
So next year will be our 5th year, and we'll have over 100 students having gone through it. And we have quarterly programs for our graduates. So hopefully next year we can actually all come together. It's really interesting. We have every year about 50 mentors and graphic designers who volunteer their time. The graphic designers volunteer and create a brand for one business. Each volunteer graphic designer creates a brand for one business. It is the coolest thing ever. And then we pair each business up with a business mentor as well as a financial mentor so that they understand the financials of their business as well as the marketing and sales components and competition. And so some of the businesses we even pair up with prototyping mentors. So if they are launching a gadget or a new widget, we pair them up with, or a new app, we pair them up with a mentor who can help, pull something together for their pitch. And so, next year, hopefully we can pull all of these people who've helped, over 5 years together, including all of the students, obviously, and celebrate the fact that we've done it for 5 years and look at the Baton Rouge community, the businesses and the individuals who have all come together to help make it a reality.
That is just fascinating. I just love that.
Yeah.
I mean, so this will be the 5th year handing out the $25,000
That's right.
big prize.
That's right. So it's beginning next fall.
Right.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So where do you see yourself 5 or 10 years down the road?
That's a great question. I'm thrilled that Claire Willis is in charge of YA on the operational side, and I like to contribute, as much as she'll have me. We make a good team, and there are others on the team. And so, do we double up this class? Do we make it bigger and better? There are lots of questions that you have to sort of think through, so I'll be part of that process. But so far, it's really fun to do what we do.
Yeah.
Change lives.
I mean, that's just exhilarating to hear you describe all that and to think, that I think when you're that young, the experience that most of us went through is just it not being clear what that path forward is, and we all go through that. And for an entrepreneur, someone that's entrepreneurial minded, that may be even more confusing. But to have that path illuminated with all those resources that come together, and it's not that they have to necessarily execute
That's right.
on what they, walked in with that August, but if nothing else, get a clearer vision of what the path forward may look like, and again in that beautiful building and.
Yeah.
What other opportunities does it open up?
That's right. And as I tell, we have, 100 or so businesses that have contributed in some form or fashion, including restaurants, because this starts at 5 p.m. and these are high school students. They're always hungry. I know this personally, so we always feed them. And the restaurants have been tremendous. And what I tell these businesses is, a ninth grader will launch a business this year, which is tremendous, and may not decide, in 4 years that is the business that he or she wants to continue with, which is fine, because what a phenomenal employee that person will be, because he or she understands marketing. They understand what a P&L is at 15, or 14. So, it's bigger than an entrepreneurial opportunity. It's also how do we help shape individuals to be exceptional public speakers who can not only stand up in front of 20 people in their class, but also 200 at a community pitch and answer questions live and have the confidence that maybe they didn't have at the beginning of class.
Wow. That is so cool. That's the coolest thing I've ever heard. Deborah, I really appreciate you coming in and sharing your journey and your stories of what you're doing now, and congratulations on impacting so many young entrepreneurs in such a powerful way. So
thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I just can't tell you how in awe I am of that conversation. It's no great surprise that Deborah was a communications major. I just love the stories from her grandparents coming over from Germany and then making their way to Baton Rouge and starting in the business, growing Godshaws and Maison Blanche through the work of her grandparents and then her father Hans and Uncle Joseph into the largest family-owned department store in the country with 8,000 employees. Just unbelievable. Sell that, start an insurance company, and grow that tremendously, and sell that. And then Deborah's whole career was just magical. Just absolutely fascinating to hear. But what she's doing right now with the Young Entrepreneurs Academy is just spectacular. And I love learning so much about that. We appreciate Deborah coming in. We appreciate everything that their family has done for our community and our state. And we appreciate you guys watching. So thank you, and we'll catch you next time. We would like to thank our title sponsor, B1 Bank. They can be found online at b1bank.com. The Next Entrepreneur is produced by Propel Productions. You can find more information at propelyourstory.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the Next Entrepreneur podcast and hit the bell for notifications. You can also follow us on social media. The links are in the description below.